I'm going to work with ink or pencil, creating quick blind contour drawings, field drawings, or just any type of sketch or drawing, as we saw in previous weeks, using a color. My color that I selected is red. So, my first one is this. I think about my subject. So I have an apple. Now, I don't want to make this too big. Just in one. I want to fit maybe 2, 3, 4 things on this bottom page, and then another 4, 5, 6 things up here. Spread them around. So there's 10 things in... Wait, let me see. I have 11 things actually. So 11 things on 2 pages. So just so you get an idea. One of them could be bigger. That's actually what we talked about last week, how you set up your scenes, how you create composition, contrast between sizes. So here's not just 3, it's just the one apple. So how do I do that? I could just go ahead and draw. So I'm going to go ahead and draw my apple right here. And I'm just going to do a quick outline blind contour. There it is. And it's going to be this simple. And I'm going to bring in a wet on wet wash. So I'm going to drop some water. Now, the idea here is you're going to begin to stylize your washes into your drawings. So notice how I just drop the paint in. And I'm just going to let it sit there and dry for a while until I come back later maybe when it dries just a little bit more. Do I need to mix color into this wash? Maybe a tiny, tiny little touch of yellow right in here. Let it mix right at the edge. Now what I want to do is pretty much keep this whole page red. So it's all things red. I suggested that some of you could, maybe if your favorite color is blue, to look and find some references of things. You don't want to just draw them out of your imagination. You want to look at them. And nowadays with the internet, all you got to do is just Google it. Apple. But if you wanted to do, let's say, all things purple, or all things blue, or all things green. So you're going to have to pick things that are green, things that are blue, and then go with that sketch. So I'm thinking about all things red. So I'm going to mix a little bit of my black into my red. And I'm going to add just a little bit of a shadow here so it blends in with the bottom. So I just touched a little bit of black into the red that I had on my palette, right in here. And now I'm doing a little bit of wet on dry and wet on wet at the same time, because you see how this apple at the bottom here, it was still wet. So now it's mixing and blending with that. And I want to get more sketchy. I want to get looser. I want you to get really loose, really quick. And I'm going to do the same up here at the top. So it's wet on wet. Just a dab of red. And in this case, just a little dab of black. While it's still wet, I could wait a little longer. So I have the right technique going on. And then I'm just going to add more red and black right here. Wet on dry. And there we have it. There's my apple. So I'm going to try to get 10 red things on this composition. And I want them to be playful. I want them to be really, what would be the word? Not funny, but quirky. And it's mostly about the drawing and the technique of your wash. So I hope you're done with this apple, because I'm estimating 5 to 7 minutes, maybe 10 minutes at most for these 10 things. And we might have to go faster through some of them. So for example, this next one may be even faster. Oh! So what do I do here? I'm going to go back into... Now, do I have to use always the same red? Ideally, but I could use a different one. I'm going to use my warm red, and I could always make it a little more orange, a little more towards the yellow. But for this one, I am going to do wet on dry. So notice that I'm starting not with a drawing, but just with a quick wash. So I'm going to do, let me see, I'm thinking about composition too. So I'm just going to make these a little bit bigger than the apple. And they're going to be down here. So I'm just going to do a quick wet on dry. 1 and 2. I'm going to let that dry just a little bit as I bring in a little bit of green. And this green, I need to mix it with a little bit of yellow. That'll be with some of this warm yellow. Oh, I like that. That's it right there. Because it looks a little more neon. And I'm just going to add these beautiful little stems right there. Don't let the color mix. Don't let the color touch yet. Bring back just a touch of that red right here at the top. There we go. And while this is drying, I'm going to grab, this time I'm going to grab a little bit of blue and add it to that red and black that I had earlier. And it's a different red, but I think it'll work well. So while it's still wet, I'm going to make this a wet on dry wash. So I'm not using layers yet, because if I want to use layers, I have to let it fully dry. If my wash is still wet, the paint is going to mix. But I just want to add a little bit of a shadow here. And a little bit of a shadow right here. So this one pretty much dried already. So this could be a layer. So when I do a layer, I could see a little bit clearer how the light and shadows. And that's pretty much all I'm worried about right now. Do I need to do a little bit of shadow to my stem? I think right on the side of this one here. There we go. Pretty cool. Moving along just a little bit. One thing I should mention. Oh no, I went a little bit too much pigment in here. With a brush and water, I could actually rub. And you have to be careful how much you rub, because you could lift the paper and then lift with the paper towel. You see how I bring that white right back up? I hope you saw that. Very important, this lifting technique. Sometimes you add too much pigment or the water runs a little too much into the area that you want it lighter, that this area is fully saturated. So with a clean brush and a little bit of water, I'm going to rub until I see the pigment moving. And then I'm going to use a paper towel and just dab and lift. And there it is. It just lifted all of that pigment. Now this does not happen with every pigment. Some pigments are too staining and they just stain the paper all the way through in one pass. But now I have light in my cherries, and there it is. And it's a completely different look. Wouldn't you agree? There they are. So now we move to the next one. Before we do that, I want to go back very quickly to the apple and add a layer. So what color am I going to add to the layer? I'm going to add the same color. And I'm just going to do it wet on dry. So my first wash was wet on wet. This one is going to be wet on dry, and I'm just going to add one side right there. And then using my smaller brush, I'm going to add a little bit of water right at the edge, and I'm going to soften up that edge. I added a layer on my dry wash of the same pigment, and then just using a little smaller brush with a little bit of water. As this is still wet, I just add moisture and allow that pigment to create kind of a gradient. Now I'm trying to lift a little bit here and bring it over to the top, just to create that nice shadow effect in the back. Kind of a little bit of that cavity. And before we move on, I'm going to grab a little more black and add it right here at the bottom to just darken that shadow. And I'm also doing that wet on dry as a layer, but it is darker. You could still see the color underneath. A watermelon. Yes, let's do the watermelon. Very quick. So for the watermelon, I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of ink to this page. And I'm going to go ahead and switch over to the top, so all my fruits and goodies are not just on the bottom. And I'm going to do that right here. And I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. So I'm just going to kind of blind contour again. Why? Because I love blind contour. I think it's the best. One of my favorite techniques. Break my line. Add it more as a drawing. I'm going to add a little film. Just a thin little line here. Nice gradation I could see here. And I'm going to add some of those seeds. That's it. Trying to keep it pretty close to what it looks like. And once again, red. This one looks like it's going to be wet on dry. Now I have an area of white here. So I want the paint to bleed in but not go all the way. So I'm going to leave just a little space without water. And I'm adding clean water, once again, being able to see it. I could go over these seeds because they're darker. I could always come back and do a layer of black over the red or ink. And then I'm going to pick my color. Which color is this? Is it a mixture of both of these reds? So I'm looking at these two here. Is it this one? Touch it on. Or is it this one? Actually, it looks very, very close to this one. So I'm just going to use wet on wet. And notice how the pigment just begins to run on the water here. So using this wet on wet, and I'm going to just drop it in. And hopefully it just rolls all the way down when I lift it. But that's kind of the look I want to create once it reaches down here. Because it is almost the texture, that look of the veiny red into white with the watercolor. And that's it right there. Actually need a little more red right here. And I could always bring in my smaller brush, adding a little more moisture. But not brushing. I'm not brushing in. I'm letting the pigment just run down. And have it look very natural. Just that veiny look. And with that same green that I used for the cherries, I'm just going to wet on dry right there. Don't need a shadow for this one yet. I'll wait till it dries a little more. But there we have it. We have so far 3 elements of red. And this composition is starting to look good. We need to let that one dry. Please let me know in the chat if I'm going too fast. But this is kind of a challenge. 10 things in 15 minutes? Let's see if we can get it done. We can make them a little fun, a little more fun, a little less. A heart. That's easy. Pick my brush. Now, should I do a heart wet on dry or wet on wet? I'm going to go ahead and do it wet on dry. Pick my color. Do I need a drawing or can I just brush it in? And I'm going to brush it in. I'm going to use the middle of my page, which is usually tricky. So I don't want a fancy drawing that is kind of difficult to get in here. So this looks like an easy one. I'm going to use the heart, and I'm going to use the what's called the spine of my sketchbook to make that right in there. And just swoop it in. There we go. And it actually looks pretty good. Now I could always add more technique. This feels like it's too easy. Wet on dry. No. Nothing exciting. Well, I'm going to do something just to show you. I have a little bit of pigment left on my brush, and I have grabbed my mechanical pencil, and I'm going to tap my brush. Just added some spatter to that heart. Maybe too much. And while it's still wet, I'm gonna soften up some of the inside, so it's more of a wet on wet with the soft edge. And it's a nice look. It kind of hides a little bit of the fact that it's right on the spine, but sometimes it begins to show a little more. See, like it's puddling here, right over that piece of thread that it's, but that's good. I like it. Some spatters that may have gotten away, I can lift them before they dry, or just kind of incorporate them into my composition. Okay, so this one was easy. This was less than 5 minutes for sure. Let's go to the next one. Ooh, a mushroom. Now, I begin to think, where's my mushroom going to go? I'm going to put it right here. So for this one, once again, I'm going to make a nice quick drawing. Blind contour, I love it. I want to make sure it fits my composition, so I just want to make sure I have this. And I can make it not so realistic. I want it to have a little bit of that look. And then very bulky with a couple of little pieces of grass and foliage things right down here. There we go. So I made it a little bit smaller, kind of similar in size. And how am I going to do this? So here I'm going to use a smaller brush. I'm going to go wet on dry, and I'm going to use, because my cherries have that same cadmium red, I'm going to use my alizarin. So I'm mixing the reds, not to make it too monotonous when they're side by side. And what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to scumble my watercolor in. So going over the edges, and I'm going to leave little white areas. So what I'm going to try to do here is I'm going to scumble my watercolor. Ooh, and it's drying. So get some washes, and as I look at the mushroom, I'm not looking for absolute precision. I want to get maybe the outline of it. And just scumble in, leaving a couple of areas of white. And are you doing wet on dry, wet on wet? Could you do this wet on wet? It may be more difficult. How would you keep the white? But everything's possible. One big tip for this one, it would be to come back over with white ink or white acrylic or white gouache. And then just paint the white spots over. Another thing would be masking fluid, which preserves the whites and allows you to do any type of wash you want to do. Then you just remove it, and there it is. You have your whites preserved. So all these little whites, keep scumbling in, and you make them fun. This gives it a lot more character. You can get more creative. And I do want just a little bit. I'm going to use my sepia. And I'm going to use wet on dry once again for the shadow. And right here at the bottom, I see a little bit of just like a darkening of the red. So I'm going to let them mix, hopefully, if it didn't dry too fast. And then with lots of water, I'm going to just let that color bleed down. So it kind of looks white and as if it were in the shadows. There it is, but not too much pigment. That looks pretty good. I'm going to bring in some of that green again and just touch it. Wet on dry. Just sketched it in. And there it is. Oh, nice. Okay. There's our mushroom. What other things do we have that are red? Okay, nice. Go back to ink. This one I'm going to make bigger. I'm going to make this ladybug way big over here. So I have to do a little bit of just a measurement of composition here. How am I going to introduce it? And just semicircle. Very easy drawing. If you just follow some of the patterns, see some of the spots, leave some of that white. And it plays out perfect because we just did white on red. Now we're going to do black on red. And remember, this is not about just the perfect drawings. You want to sketch freely and fun. So if you're not doing blind drawing, you could be missing out. Matter of fact, you could make this ladybug into anything you want. So it could have a face. It could have a... Ooh, it could have been eating the cherries. See? Just thought of that. And this one I am going to make wet on wet. I want to preserve a lot of this light area. Make everything else darker. So I'm going over the back. And just leaving a little bit of empty space here. Bring in the color. Wet on wet. And as the color begins to bleed towards the middle here, I'm going to grab, once again, my smaller brush and just add moisture, a little bit of water to let that soft gradation happen. And give us that sensation of light. Now this is going to need a layer for the shadows. It is going to need, I could do that with watercolor or with ink. I'm going to do watercolor. So I'm going with just black. Wet on dry. Make it a little bit deeper black. But you also have some of that play of light as well. So lift some of that. There we go. Get it on some of the legs. And a little bit here in the face. Now this needs to be fully dry before I do anything with it. I'm testing it out, see if we're almost there. And when I use that a little bit, just the right amount of moisture, I know this paper, how it behaves. So it doesn't have to be 100% dry. But you always want to favor the side of make sure if you want to do a proper layer or you don't want your paints to mix, that it's fully dry. Give it extra time. One way to tell is to touch the back of it. If it feels cold, cool, it's still wet. Now I may have jumped the gun here with the black. I could have done that second layer of deeper red before I lay down the black. So now I'm really going to have to wait. I want to add a little extra here and some of the light and shadows. Just like that. And maybe I could do a flower or something where it's a red flower where it's going to be sitting on. But once again, we're going to have to wait, come back with the second wash. And that second wash, same color. Or maybe you could even switch, mix some of those switch it up with the mix it up with a little bit of the reds that you have in your on your palette and see what happens with that. So here I'm letting it bleed a little bit out of the black. So I would call this my 1.5 layer. Not the number 2. Still have to come back to it. But remember, it's about playing with technique. So you see me here playing with a little bit of wet on dry, wet on wet. But overall, it's just that sensation of sketching with color. Not losing a lot of the light. And there we go. There's our ladybug. A little bit happier with that one. Could do a little better with some deeper shadows, so it's a little more of a break in light and shadow. And some of those spots looking good. And whatever it's going to be doing here. Okay, ladybug. What's next? I think I have an interesting one for you. Ooh, pair of red shoes. How are we going to do that? Well, you could skip them. You could do one. You don't have to do both. I do want to do one of them. And where am I going to do that next? I'm going to have to move up here and probably go over here on this side. This one I definitely want to draw. I'm going to start with pencil. I want to get a good sense of how big this is going to be. And I'm just going to do the shoe, not the leg or anything else. So here I'm doing a little bit of that, once again, blind drawing. Very slow, following the contour. Looking down, peeking just every now and then. Make sure I have the shape or the proportion. There we go. Nice. We have a line that goes here. So again, if you're drawing with pencil or ink, beginning to read into what is the better combination for my drawings. Is it ink and watercolor or is it pencil and watercolor? Some of the things you can do with it. What do you enjoy more? It comes down to that. There we go. And it's not much in terms of detail. This one feels like it should be wet on dry. When you paint your watercolors in your sketchbook, I hope you keep that sensation of sketching with color. When we draw, we can get really nice and loose, but when we start to paint, we lose that relaxation of the way we're seeing, the way we're trying to transfer the image, and we get kind of a little bit of tense, tight, stiff. So find a way to keep it nice, loose, and relaxed. I always say the word sketchy. In a sketching mode. I'm just going with watercolor for this beautiful line. There we go. And they just got a little bit messy right here. All right, there's my shoe. Now for this one, I may want to add just a little bit of shadow underneath. Just to place it in our... There we go. Okay, so here's what the composition's looking like. And so far we got 7. Let's go to number 8. And I leave the shoes still showing in case you need them. Nice. I love these. So this one's going to be really... There is no better place for it than right here. So it's going to be tiny next to the ladybug. Because it's also a bug. Oh no, it's a beetle, actually. So here we go. How can I do this? Just make sure you get your proportions right. And the easiest way to draw this, guaranteed, is to try a blind contour drawing. Even if it overlaps your ladybug, which it may happen to me, I'm going to live with it. I'm going to enjoy it as part of my composition. Just making sure you get some of those lines, the curves of them. But nice, loose, in your sketch mode. You could rearrange the shapes if you feel like you have to. So it fits a little bit better your composition. And this one really overlapped my ladybug. But I think I have enough information here just to get a sense of what it is. There we go. And I'm just going to wash it in lightly with cool alizarin crimson red. Once again, to break, just give it a little variation. Overlap it right into my ladybug. Add a little bit of contrast. Look for some of those shadow or deeper color areas, like right in here. And right back here. So I didn't fully draw it all the way back, but it does overlap. And it's there. They're sharing space. Going for a little bit of this, just the black tires here. And just some information here in the window. Now everything else I can do here with maybe going back to ink instead of trying to force it with watercolor. Or even pencil. Now, one thing I have not done is, you've noticed, I've colored all of it almost always in. You don't have to do that. You could leave areas that are not covered in color. I'm just adding a few more lines to break the patterns. Haven't really added much in terms of smaller detail lines. I think this is the perfect opportunity just to do that a little bit. There we go. This one also will need a layer. So when fully dry, we'll come back and add a second layer to those deeper shadow areas of the same color right in here, just to show you what it will look like. So this is again wet on wet. But you see when I add that second layer, you immediately see the volume. Making sure you preserve some of those highlights. And a better sense of the shape of it. There we go. Very quick. Have one more. Actually, two more. A fire hydrant. And I was running out of ideas. What else is red? A lot of things red, but when you're looking for them, okay, not so obvious. When this dries, I'm actually going to go over my shoe with ink, especially because I want those shoelaces to be better described, more prominent, the way they were in the image. And maybe clean up some of these lines as well. And some of these nice little kind of stitching features. Definitely want to add some of those in there. Immediately it starts looking better. So fire hydrant. Fire hydrant, I'm going to add it right in here. Right above the shoe. Going with ink once again. And for bonus, you have tulips. So if anyone has extra time, fire hydrant. Once again, highly recommended to do a majority of blind contour drawing. There we go. It's a nice, very simple shape. Now, how far do I want to take the details of this? It's up to you. And I'm not going to take it too far. That's pretty much it. And once again, how do I get that rusty look of it? I'm going to actually try for a mixture of wet on dry, wet on wet. As I lay down my paint, pull it towards the dry, and then by wetting the edges of the paper, make it look rusty. Pick up some more pigment and add it here at the bottom. That was a little too much. Making sure you have a paper towel at all times so you can manage the moisture and the amount of pigment that you're picking up with the watercolor is very important. So here, see, immediately I begin to have a sense of better light and shadows with a little better definition and immediate rendering of technique there. Now this dried, so I'm going to go right back into my watercolor, and I'm just going to paint these seeds in right here. 1, 2, and 3. Amazing how simple that is. Adding a little bit of shadow right underneath, so it's not just up there floating in space. But you make that call. All of these exercises, the reason we're doing them is so you can begin to analyze your thought process, how you put things together, how you combine a composition. In the end, what worked, what didn't, how would you do it differently? We have one last one. And how could we not have that? So this one, go into pencil, and I'm just going to make this right in here. Biggest shape. Am I going to fit everything or just the face? I want to make the face way bigger. So I'm going to look at how this is going to fit better in my composition. And that fluffy nice little fluffy look. Keep it very simple. We need some orange. Did I have some orange ready? Now this one I'm going to have to wait just a little bit, fully dry. And there we go. Never thought it was this easy. And as you can see it coming together, this is one of those where I'm not going to paint the entire subject. I'm just going to use touches and edges. Just a little bit of a different technique. So it's not solid color all the way through. Just reaching towards the edges, saturating. Not just a typical color it all in. Filling it up pretty good. Leaving spaces, brush strokes where you could see where one ends, the other one ends. And it actually kind of has that sense of furry texture. Messy. I'll probably come back over some of the black areas in the mouth and the eyes with ink. And I'm just going to let this color fade away out here into the edges of the page, just to kind of hint, insinuate at the body. But look how loosely you can do that. Just dabbing the paint on. And there we have it. Just a quick, fun exercise on simple washes, simple layers, sketching. It was supposed to be 10 things in 50 minutes. And we got it done.